Hi, everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and welcome to Books and Looks. Yes, it's our voyage of discovery in the wonderful world of books. Books that I've been reading and authors I've been interviewing. And today we have friend of the podcast, Aimie Runyan, with us. That's right, Aimie Runyan is coming with us for her new book. You may remember Aimie was with us back in September for her book, A Bakery in Paris. Now we're going down to Provence. That's right, we're going to Provence for her newest book, a contemporary fiction book called The Memory of Lavender and Sage. It is a wonderful book. I loved it. She talks about so many great things from the background and the history and the small towns of Europe that are trying to survive and struggle to survive when this young girl named Tempesta arrives. Okay. And some of the powers that she has with growing herbs and how that affects things. Her friendships there and friendships here, and how she's affected by her family who basically disinherit her. Oh, my word. Yeah, her family in New York, or Connecticut, I should say. Yeah, Connecticut. So this is really well done. And again, as in so many of Amy's books, we've got recipes. Yes, there are recipes in here. I love it. My wife loves her recipes, and she's even used some of them on her YouTube channel. If they haven't made it to No Fear Cooking, they made it to my stomach. No Fear Eating. So I'm eating and she's cooking, and all thanks to Aimie. You're going to really love it. So without any further ado, let's just go right into my interview with Aimie Runyan. Aimie, welcome to Books and Looks.
Thank you so much for having me, Blaine. It's great to be back.
Well, we are so happy to have you. Like I said, she's a friend of the podcast. She was here in September for her book, A Bakery in Paris, which was delicious. Oh, there it is back there. It is luscious, delicious, was tremendous. And she has a new book now called The Memory of Lavender and Sage. Very good book. Very good book. But before we get into that, for those who may not have caught that September podcast, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? What type of writing and creative writing, etc.? Tell us a little bit about Aimie Runyan.
Well, I grew up in Northern California, and my parents are still there in the house they had when I was born. So a nice small town called Placerville, and I get to go there shortly, actually, to do a book event, which will be fun. And it's just a lovely community, and I kind of gravitated toward that bustling small town vibe. And so now I live in Estes Park, Colorado, which is even smaller as far as permanent residency, but we explode during the summer as a tourist town for tourism into the national park, Rocky Mountain National Park. And so I definitely have a spot for small town, which is, kind of the memory of lavender and sage is sort of my tribute to that. It is, the struggling small town trying to remain relevant, which is becoming harder and harder in today's global economy. And and we can talk more about that later. But I write mostly historical fiction, but this is my first foray into contemporary fiction, and it was a great deal of fun once I figured out what in the world I was doing. And I'm married. I have two darling children, two cats, and a dragon.
That's tremendous. Well, now, almost all your books have something to do with France? Okay, so do you consider yourself a Francophile? And if so, when did you realize that?
Well, I have a master's degree in French, so that probably goes a bit beyond Francophile, Franco obsessed, perhaps. So a lot of my books, at least tangentially, touch on France in some way or another. Even Daughters of the Night Sky, which was about the Russian female fighter pilot, she ends up settling in Provence at the end of it. Because why not? And so even tangentially, they do touch on France. And it's just because it's a culture that has always fascinated me. I got to take an intro to French class when I was in third grade. Each of the teachers got to do a little mini unit on something they were a specialist in. One of them did art, another did, I can't remember. All we did drama. That's it. We did drama, and so that stuck too. Bit of a theater nerd, and but the French, I thought it was amazing. I loved learning a foreign language. It felt like a secret code. And so as soon as I had the option to take French again in high school, I signed up and took all 4 years. And, I went into college not entirely certain about what I wanted to major in. I had a lot of areas of interest. Do I want to, do writing and study creative writing and English? Do I want to do a foreign language? Do I want to go into pre-law? There were a lot of options out on the table, or music, theater, all those things. I was a theater major for a semester, and but I tested into French at the junior level, my first year in college, and so that was kind of like it became automatically my major almost. And I just decided to run with it and graduate early. And I got to live in France in Provence, and that's kind of the inspiration for that, for Memory of Lavender and Sage. So I lived in Provence my sophomore year in college, and it was a tremendously transformative experience. So I've always been interested in the French culture, and I started a master's degree at Indiana University in Bloomington and finished it up in 10 years later in University of North Texas in Denton. And that was really, my first books were a direct result of my master's thesis. So my study of French has been a direct result, or my writing has been a direct result of my French studies, actually.
Wow. Since third grade. Wow. That's something else. That's great.
Great, Mrs.
Yeah.
Steele.
There you
Yeah, Mrs.
Now,
Steele, my French teacher. Yeah, she's not even Mrs. Steele anymore. She got a new last name. But yeah, I got to see her on a book of it. It's so great. I got to see that they hosted me on a book club, and talking with these people that had such a formative impact on my youth. It was a lovely experience to have that.
absolutely. Now tell me, do you have any favorite French authors or French historians? Anybody you go to read or research?
Certainly, I am a big fan of course, Victor Hugo had a big impact on a bakery in Paris. Um, Pagnol with his Jean de Florette series was tremendously inspiring. And yeah, there are some French African authors that I really enjoy reading. Mariam Abba, she only lived long enough to write two books, but they were gorgeous, and it had to do with plural marriage in in sub-Saharan Africa, in Senegal. And both of those books were just books that stuck with me, and I enjoyed study those in college. So those are the ones that come to mind for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said you were a theater major, and I like reading plays. Yes, I'm one of the strange guys who will enjoy reading plays. And I love the plays of Moliere. I hope I'm pronouncing that
Oh,
right.
Moliere, yeah.
Yeah, and
Moliere.
Moliere, okay. And many of his plays are 8, 10, 12 pages long. And I've never understood why English teachers don't use those, or drama teachers don't use those when kids in high school. Don't read Shakespeare. It's very long and difficult and confusing at times, but read some of Moliere stuff because he's so accessible, and it's so funny. So many of his things. He's one of my favorites. I got to be honest with you. So there's my pitch. Yeah.
Oh, Moliere is fabulous. I remember I read, I think we did. So in high school, of course, we were working at a lower level than we were in English, obviously, because we're starting from ground zero. But we did get to the point where we're reading Jean Paul Sartre in third year French, because my French teacher, Mr. Chapman, he was serious. He was absolutely serious. And we did good work. We did good work. And I do remember reading a little bit of Moliere in high school, more so in college. But you're right, like a good translation of Moliere be a great intro to Shakespeare. I think that, if you are teaching the English language, it would be a disservice to have kids graduate high school without having read any Shakespeare. But by all means, start with the sonnets and start with bite-sized chunks. But I think we are, and it's been a long time, because I was a French and slash English teacher for a long time before I got into writing. And I will say that I think that attention spans are shrinking. So I remember in high school, every year we had to study a different Shakespearean play. And it was a lot for us back then, but I think attention spans are even shrinking. So I think that spending 6 weeks on one work of literature is a big ask of high school students nowadays, which is a shame. I remember studying the Scarlet Letter in the most minute details. It's like, what was the significance of Hester Prynne's shoes in this scene? And it's like Nathaniel Hawthorne is like, didn't want to have bare feet. I don't know. But yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we definitely, that was like I remember that particular unit being like kind of a master class in literary analysis and so incredibly useful. But I'm not sure that that's what's happening in high schools anymore, which is a shame to a certain degree.
Absolutely. Now, you said you have a couple children. Do they show a proclivity towards writing? Are they following in your footsteps at all?
My son less so. He's a tech boy, and if you want to get him to read, you print out a tech manual for a fire alarm control panel. He is my father's son, basically. Like that sounds creepy, but like he is a chip off his grandfather's block. In that my dad was a fire marshal, and my son has this low key obsession with fire safety, and loves the equipment. Like he wanted a used fire alarm panel for Christmas, and so he's got this entire setup in his bedroom. So he likes reading nonfiction, and that's how I pull him in, because both of my son especially is a reluctant reader. My daughter was, but now is becoming much more of a literary kid. So they're coming home. The end of the school year is today, actually, and the superintendent has these workbooks for every kid, which is wonderful. Like, it's just like it's like little snippets of standardized testing, which isn't ideal, but it's something for the kids to do, and there's incentives and stuff. But my daughter came home also with a copy of Pride and Prejudice from fifth grade, and she asked to read Lavender and Sage, and so there is definitely she's wanting to read adult level books. Of course, it's a little slower for her, but she has pulled through her reluctance of reading amazingly. Now, is she interested in becoming an author for a living? I don't know. Like last I heard, she wanted to be a musician. That's what she said on career day the other day when I showed up. I decided to show up in for career day in a nice dress with a book print on the bottom and some swag from conferences rather than in a bathrobe with a tear stained manuscript. I didn't want to disillusion the children quite so young. They were third, fourth, and fifth graders. So, darling kids that they were. And so, oh my gosh, the little ones that came that wanted to be authors were so excited to talk to me. But last I heard, she wanted to be a musician like Taylor Swift. Don't we all? But I think there's definitely a literary proclivity there, whether it becomes a profession or a hobby or a skill set that she applies to another career. I'm just so incredibly proud of that kid. She's just amazing. She's amazing. She could, and I today is my last day as a parent of elementary school children, and it stings.
Glad to hear that. Glad to hear, not that you're stinging, but I'm glad that your daughter's having some interest in the literature and art. That's wonderful. Now, you do so many novels based on France. Do you have to go over to France a lot for your research, or do you do most everything you can get it all off the internet near you?
I did not get to go to France. My last trip to France before recently was in 2009, I want to say. So right before I became a mother, and that was my last trip to France. Now, of course, my first two books were Canadian. His French, there was a lot of ties with France because it was the French immigration. So I did my research in Canada for those. But the others, no, I didn't get to go to Europe until my next trip to Europe after that stint in grad school was in 2022, and I got to do a lovely tour all around Europe with my husband. It was basically a delayed honeymoon. And I got to do a bit of research and take pictures for a bakery in Paris. And I was able, because we were in copy edits, I want to say. So I was able to take promo pictures, but also add in a few details because you have the flexibility at copy edit stage. You can add in a few lines. I don't want you necessarily rewriting a full chapter, but you can add in a few details without any hardship whatsoever. And so I did that. But on that trip, also, we went to Provence, and I did a fair amount of on the ground research for the memory of Lavender and Sage, wandering around the two villages that inspired the book. And that was a great deal of fun. And then I got to go back again last year for a week. So after a long absence, I've gotten to go to France twice within less than a year of each other. And I spent an entire week in Paris researching for my next historical book, Mademoiselle Eiffel. And I spent the most of the time in the archives of the Musée d'Orsay in the Eiffel family archives, which was incredible. And then the rest of the time I did some more promo pictures for a bakery in Paris and doing other things, and stocking up promo pictures for Mademoiselle Eiffel and trying to use those research trips, for as many purposes as possible.
Good. Wonderful. Now, would you be able to, and would you mind to read a little passage from the book before we get started to talk about it?
So I'm just going to start from the beginning because I think it is. I really that's generally I generally don't like reading from the beginning, but I think it's a good intro to what we're doing. So, winter, Greenwich, Connecticut. The odd thing about a forbidden space was that when its owner died, it still felt forbidden. I crossed the threshold in my father's bedroom, and though he was powerless to stop me, presumably far beyond caring that I trespassed into his private lair, felt like an errant teenager once again risking a lecture on boundaries and respect. I was instinctively prepared to double back at any moment and retreat to the safety of what had once been my bedroom. But it was foolish. Dad wasn't around the corner, and the room wasn't his any longer. Even though his essence still permeated every inch of the dreary space, nothing belonged to him, and he belonged to nothing and no one anymore. I wish the tears would have welled up in my and blurred my vision. Dad deserved that much, I supposed. But try as I might, they didn't come. My eyes stayed dry until I saw the faded yellow tome of Mamma's on his nightstand. I opened it to the first page and read the lines as ingrained in my childhood memory as Mother Goose was to every other child in Connecticut. I sing the love of a Provençal maid, how through the wheat fields of La Croix she strayed, following the fate that drew her to the sea, unknown beyond remote La Croix was she, and I who would tell the rustic tale of her would fain be Homer's humble follower. Mamma would read the old epic poem in Occitan aloud to me in bits and pieces each night, explaining their meaning. Like spoon feeding psalms to a child, Mamma taught me to know this poem like it was scripture. It was a story of forbidden romance and tragic loss. It was Romeo and Juliet, though rife with class struggles in place of family feud. She loved the story that was written more than 100 years ago by Frédéric Mistral as a tribute to the dying language and culture he loved. Okay, so there you go. And yeah, that was the intro to this book.
There you go. Very good. All right. So now we've got you. We have the intro. Now tell us a little bit in your own words about the plot of the book and some of the main characters, if you would.
Well, Tempesta is a young woman. She's a food critic in New York, and to paraphrase The Devil Wears Prada, she's got the job a million girls would kill for, but she's just not one of them. She's disaffected with her work, and it all stems from kind of being the square peg in the round hole of her family. And she has felt that way since her mother passed away when she was very young. Her mom passed away when she was 13, and we open when her father's passed away. And so she's come back from the city to pay respects to her father, even though theirs was a complicated relationship. And she learns, and this isn't a spoiler because it's the inciting incident, chapter one stuff, that her father has left the entirety of the Luddington fortune to her younger brother, Wall, short for Walter. All the men in the family are Walter. And and they get shorter by generation. And she's not surprised by this, even if she's stung a bit, but finds out that her mother had left her a nest egg to be given to her at some point in her adulthood, and her father had determined that that would be when he passed away, and he passes away rather young too from stress from his work. And so she decides to take that money because she's never felt like she belongs, and buys a ramshackle farmhouse sight unseen in Provence, in the village where her mother came from. And there she learned, a lot about herself and about her, where she does fit in the world. And she finds family, finds a connection with people that she hasn't felt before, and finds a way to make herself relevant in this village that is struggling to stay alive because, the villages in France are emptying out. And that's true all over Europe, but especially in France, and even more so in Spain, and really in Portugal. And even though they aren't in France's empty diagonal, it's still affecting a lot of small towns. And she finds a way to make herself relevant, not as an outsider coming to save the day, but as somebody who has ties to the village and who is of Saint-Colomb, which is a fictional village.
Your one character, grandmother, Tempesta's grandmother, is pretty doggone
Lucy.
evil. Yeah, she's not a nice lady.
Oh yeah, she's rough.
Ooh, I'll tell you.
Is a character.
Did she come over in the Mayflower? I mean, this is that's how it reads, as if this is a generational thing. What does she do to make Tempesta not feel welcome in the family?
Oh, like she goes out of her way to make sure she, especially once she moved out, like when she made her high school years absolutely miserable, her most vulnerable years miserable just by, always suspecting her of malfeasance or what have you. And, going through her bedroom and throwing away things that had belonged to her mother. And just downright nasty stuff. But it became more subtle after she moved out, by like making sure she wasn't invited home for holidays, or when she did come home, like a little thing is that she would always order from her favorite restaurant right before they came. So they, oh, we just ate there. I'm so sorry. Why don't we try something else? Just as a little jab to let her know that she wasn't welcome. And like, in the one of the opening scenes, she walks down and she's wearing a neck. And I'm sorry, I'm not wearing it because I have one. I realized I should have worn it. A necklace that has little charms from with little herbs de Provence that she found in a thrift shop, and it's a little bronze necklace, and she's wearing a nice respectable black dress from a thrift shop because she's broke, because she has not had any family support, and done really well for herself despite the fact that after college, boom, nothing. And that's a rough thing from from a wealthy family to do to a kid. um she's dressed respectably, but her grandmother lights on the necklace that, why didn't you wear pearls? Why didn't you wear something respectable? It's like, where in the bloody heck would I have ever been able to afford a strand of pearls? You haven't bequeathed any to me, and I don't have the money for pearls, and I have to eat. So
There you go. Wow.
yeah, I almost worried at first that I took her too far, but, thinking about the generationality, and there's some of Lucille's backstory that we don't know on the page that leads to her being kind of a bitter person. And in future books, because none of the books are really a sequence, but I'm hoping that, there are little Easter eggs, little tiny ties between the characters in the book. So you will learn potentially a little bit more about Lucille in a future book.
Very good. Well, now, you called this contemporary fiction, and it is, but it's got an old-time feel to it. You know, I don't know, I read it, and I know it's happening now, but I don't know, is it because we're having the the small town charm of Europe, where everything smells better, tastes better, the skies
Mhm.
are bluer? This just took me back in time. Is that intentional, or am I just getting too much out of this?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
No, absolutely. And I talked, so when I decided I wanted to break into contemporary fiction and not to break away from historical fiction, but to expand my readership, I knew that if I wanted to take my historical fiction readers with me, that it had to be atmospheric. Because I believe historical, and there's probably more reasons than this, but the top two reasons to my mind why people read historical fiction are to learn cool stuff about history and to get immersed in a different time and place. And I mean, there is the fact that Saint-Colomb really is sort of the town that time forgot to a certain degree. And there is a sense of nostalgia in the book. And I mean, these cities are, I mean, it's hard to feel like you're in the present day when you're walking through the streets of a city that are 1,000 years old. It's very different. It's a very different experience, and being tied to the past. But I knew that if I wanted to expand in my readership and bring my historical folks with me, that it had to be, deeply atmospheric. So I endeavored to write to all the senses, smell, and not just sight, but smell, touch, and all the other senses and emotions. And especially like her time in her greenhouse. I wanted people to feel like they had dirt under their fingernails when they were reading those scenes, and because I knew that that is what makes historical fiction special.
Yes, it certainly does. I really enjoyed it, and, well, like I said, it has an old-time charm to it, and I thought it was just perfect. I just thought it was absolutely perfect. Wow. Well, now, anyway, um, do you think that the way Lucille treated Tempesta. In addition to moving her over to going to France, do you think it also affected her in other ways? Do you think that psychologically or in other manners, the Tempesta was affected, harmed, or influenced by the grandmother?
I think that she was very, very eager to be outside of the Luddington family shadow, and Lucille is kind of like the personification of the family legacy that she of which she wanted to be free. And I think that New York was not the right place for her, and she finds her gifts. She finds her inner spark when she leaves, and she's in the village where her mother grew up, and we learn why her mother felt compelled to leave, and it's kind of a mirror image story, um, because she felt like both of them were burdened by family legacy. And I won't tell too much about her mother's story, but yeah, yeah, there is I mean, family legacy is a theme all throughout.
I thought that she may have even had a more purpose to achieve because her grandmother treated her so poorly, and yeah, Walt got everything.
Yeah, and she felt, she's always been infantilized to a certain degree and always made to feel like she was impetuous when she was not. I mean, she graduated summa cum laude with a degree in accounting to please her father, but she also majored in French and journalism, French as a legacy to her mother, and journalism to please herself. And she ended up, that's how she ended up as a food critic. And she had the strength of character to know that well, it might be smart to please dad, but I'm not going to I'm not going to that's not going to be the only thing. And she works her tail feathers off and graduates summa cum laude and achieves more academically than her brother ever did. But it's never good enough, and she realizes that there's no way, even if she stuck around and tried and tried and tried, no way that she would ever live up to her family standards. And she even tries accounting jobs and she's absolutely miserable. But their standard of what success looks like isn't what it looks like to her. And her, going and creating something beautiful in the south of France was a far better measure of success or yardstick for success for her than it would have been for anything that her family would have thrown her way. And her breaking free of those chains is really, her struggle. That really is her struggle throughout the
Hmm.
entire book.
Yeah, well, it's something else. I really enjoyed it. Now, Saint Colomb. I don't know if I'm saying it properly, but Saint Colomb is a fictional town. You told us. Is it? But you said it's based on a few towns
Yes,
you've been to. What would be those towns?
Moustier Saint Marie, which is a bijou. It's an absolute gem in the south of France. It is the most beautiful village. It has about 600 people living in it, and it's a bustling tourist town. But they've managed to retain their soul, and it's surrounded by farms. But you can't get there by train. You have to get there by car, which a lot of tourists, especially from the U.S., don't drive around a lot. They stick to the train routes, and they might have the occasional tourist bus, but you cannot get to Saint-Colomb by accident, or to I'm sorry, to Moustier Saint Marie by accident. And it's a town that Frederic Mistral, who wrote the poem Mireille, this is the book I read about. And I bought this in Provence in Avignon when I was, oh my goodness, I was, 18 years old, 19 when I bought that book, and I've had it ever since. And so that was what I was referencing. But it's this gorgeous town that Frederic Mistral absolutely loved. There's a star hanging over the top of the town, suspended by wires, that I think he gave the town because he loved it so much, and he was the champion of Provençal culture. And it's what I dreamed that Saint Colomb could become, but then you contrast it with a village like Viens of roughly the same population. And it only has that population still because the school is still open. And that was really, the external conflict is the school, right? And that was what my struggle moving from historical fiction where you have very obvious external conflicts like a war that provide the scaffolding for the story. I didn't have external scaffolding for this. It was all internal struggles, which is a lot of times the stuff that I, invent on the fly. I have that external stuff in place to give me structure, and then like, oh, the relationships, those evolve organically as I write. But I was everything was in organic relationships in this book, and it felt like I was trying to grow tomatoes. And to use a reference a very apt reference. It's like trying to grow tomatoes without a trellis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I realized that there had, the plight of the village school being the death knell. Once a village school closes, the town dies because no new families with kids will ever move in,
Mm-hmm.
or anybody who wants kids,
Yeah.
because there's nothing for them. And that's a decision made on a much higher administrative level in France than it would be here. Because education is very centralized because of events that happened in a bakery in Paris. By the way, there's all those connections.
I noticed a
Yeah,
reference there. Yeah, I
yeah.
got that. Yep. And especially for people who like to read your books, yeah, they feel, oh, a connection. I had that. There it is again. It's showing up. So that's wonderful. Now, you talk about growing. Here we have Tempesta coming to town, and she begins growing herbs and doing cooking. She hadn't done any of that before, had she? Did this something just happen when she got to that town?
So it is all about discovering her gifts, and like I've seen. So I have to say thank you to all the readers because it is my highest rated book so far. People do have been responding to it, but one of the comments was a bit of like kind of a Deus ex machina. All of a sudden, she's able to do all this stuff. She'd been to culinary school. Like that was an important point. Like when she got a job as a food critic, which was a job she'd never like aspired to, she went to culinary school to be able to know what she's talking about. She took, because she's a Luddington, she takes her craft seriously. Whatever you are, be a good one. And and she takes that motto to heart. And so she knew her way around a kitchen. She very much knew her way around her kitchen. And she'd always had a knack. I mentioned like she'd grew when her grandmother entrusted her to keep an eye on her African violets when she went on vacation. And she came back and they were flourishing. And her grandmother had accused her of killing her plants, tossing out the old ones and buying new ones. It was just because, she had this knack for plants, but she lived in New York. And I mean, yes, there are people with balcony gardens in New York, but it doesn't to me seem like an ideal place for gardening, right? But all of a sudden she's got a house with space, elbow room, and she's got an actual greenhouse. And that, the fact that the greenhouse is the first thing that gets refurbished is an interesting plot point. And Tiberi, the love interest in the book, it plays an interesting part in that. And but she decides, I'm gonna okay, so I've got a greenhouse, I need to grow stuff. And I didn't explicitly mention like, oh, she's doing a lot of Googling or what have you. But I do reference like she found a book about gardening in the library and what have you. So she's not doing everything completely off the cuff, but herbs, she figured that's a good place to start. And I mean, you need seeds, dirt, and a decent place. And she reads up on how much to water them, and they grow like gangbusters, and that's her gift. And it's just the barest hint of magical realism. And because each of the women on her mother's side of the family had this special gift, and her mother was able to imbue her emotions in embroidery. Like if she embroidered a tablecloth for newly married couples, and she thought joyful thoughts and chose the colors and the motifs carefully to inspire joy in the married couple, for example. And that's one of many examples of her mother's handicraft. And so for her, it's she has this incredible knack, and she uses the herbs to make various things like soaps and lotions and food. Obviously, food, lots of food. And somebody said like all of a sudden she knows how to do this stuff. It's like, well, it's a quick Google search away to figure out how to infuse oil. And so somebody, yeah, I noticed that one comment. It's like, oh, that's fine. But at some point, it was a reasonably long book. It's 100,000 words, and you can't get into the nitty gritty of every single detail about everything, or it bogs down the pacing. But yeah, for sure. And it's a way for her, this is her gift to the world. Like, there's a character that struggles with arthritis, and she makes a salve for her hands using specific herbs and things that are healing. And that's her way of, giving back to her community and helping people.
Well, one of the things I found fascinating was that she has this green thumb magical ability to make her herbs grow and everything else, and she talks to them, and they all do well. And then she gets upset, and she cuts some, I guess you pronounce it hyssop, kind of hyssop,
He's up.
in anger, and she throws it on the table in anger. What happened to the plant? What happened to that after she did that?
It did because it was a perennial. And she that was one of the things, like, she was like, if she'd done that to an annual plant, it would have been like murder to her almost. But so she spends the rest of that plant's life apologizing. And there's a scene where she asks permission of the plant to take a clipping for something important. That was an important moment, I thought. Her, and respecting that as a living being, the same as the rest of us. I mean, can't necessarily communicate with us, but we know that plants, do have, feelings of a sort. They respond. They respond to their environment, and that I think that it's not out of the realm of response of reason to imagine plants responding to anger. And, but when she deliberately, a plant that has imbued her with a certain level of trust, she violates that trust when she's thinking about something her brother said, and she hacks it off and she makes a lemonade that's terrible and is bitter, and it's imbuing her emotions. It's bitter and sour and awful. And, the plant wilts, and she apologizes, and it grows back to be a healthy plant, but she's always treats it with a great deal of respect and tenderness after that for the rest of the plant's life.
One of the interesting things is that the town starts to think she has some special powers also because she gave something, or some people drank or ate something that she made, and this old feud was resolved. Could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, well, she's thinking so hard while she's making pesto, Tempesta's magic pesto, and there's a recipe for it in the back of the book, in which I can't guarantee that it will settle a decades old feud, but I can't promise it won't either. She makes a pesto because it's simple, and she has this overabundance of basil in her garden. And it's a simple thing to make. She figures it's of the region. She remembers her mother making Provençal dishes and taking them to Connecticut potlucks, and people being like, "What in the world is that?" And so she wanted to make something that was familiar and of the region, like pesto, and in order to kind of fit in. And it's a simple thing. She makes it, and the entire time she's thinking, "I hope these people like me. I hope these people like me." And this is as she had no idea that she had this gift beyond all of a sudden, like, why are my herbs, like, what did they sneak something into the soil or something? Because she gets soil from a neighbor. And she's like, did they sneak, they're playing a trick on me. What's going on? Did somebody sneak in and switch the plants? And but anyway, she makes this basil, and she's imbuing it with all these positive thoughts, like, I hope they like me, I hope I'm accepted. And then when these two old men who have had a 60-year-old feud eat the pesto, are able to open up and discuss, like, why the colonel, which was obviously it was a girl, that they'd been fighting over 60 years, and they're both remarried and happier for it, but they've resented each other because of this one woman 60 years ago. And of course, the wives are the best of friends, and they're annoyed by their husband's hijinks. And they talk it out, and they mend their friendship, because so many of these feuds, isn't it true that so many of these old petty feuds could be solved by one conversation, and imbuing that food with that emotion enabled them to open up.
Hmm. Well, now, um, Tempesta doesn't really like what was called the Luddington way of doing things. Yet, when she gets over there to France, suddenly the Luddington way is ingrained in her, and she's starting to use that. How does she use the Luddington way of doing things to help not just herself but the city, the town?
Well, she knows that there is wisdom in her father's ways, and it is me of show it's kind of the anti-hallmark in that the big city isn't inherently evil. And it's just a different way of life, and her taking the skills that she learned as her father's daughter, and it's kind of a final tribute to him and a show of respect that she gained a lot from her father, even if it was not the best relationship. She learned a lot at his elbow, and this is her way of honoring it, because there is a wisdom, and she tempers that with her mother's wisdom, and saying, how can we bring tourism into the town without losing its soul? And I mean, I live in Estes Park. Isn't that's a constant battle here. We have this beautiful natural beauty. We want people to come in and we want them to go experience nature. We want them to get healthy. We want them to hike and have an amazing time here. But then there's also the reality that we need their dollars, and so we have a main street that is lined with streets that sell T-shirts and saltwater taffy, and so it's striking the balance, and because the one thing we don't want is this town to turn into the next Branson, Missouri, and it's the same. They don't want Saint-Colomb to become one giant T-shirt stand. And so she said, how can we retain our soul? Well, gastrotourism, because the people that have stayed in the town are generally of a certain age and they have some ties to agriculture. They're beekeepers and farmers. And so the thing they have in common is food. And so they can entice people in. They have a couple good restaurants, but also, a place to buy, these premium artisan ingredients that you can't get anywhere else, and of course Sahul's kitchen store. And that place, I don't know why in the world, but this little kitchen shop that was it completely popped out of nowhere when I'm writing. I did not write with Sahul's in mind at first, and it becomes a central location. This kitchen shop that is just this. It's basically an antique store for kitchenwares. People, as they're leaving town, leave their kitchenwares behind because they're going to go get new pots and pans wherever they move, or they don't need them, and they leave behind these beautiful antiques that will outlast all of us, and be extremely useful. And she finds a way to revitalize the store, and that's a symbol for revitalizing the entire village. And that store, like I can envision it so clearly in my mind. I wish it were a real place. I'd go hang out there a lot.
Well, there's a lot of really good, a lot of good descriptions of that and what's happened and how it starts to flourish. And we don't have time to get all of it because there's so much in this book. But one of the things that you have in every one of your book is food and recipe. Now, do you have a favorite recipe in this book?
In this book, I mean, the pesto is a special one, and the mint margaritas are kind of fun, because and that's what I like. I mean, it's not a bakery in Paris. The food was these classic French pastries that take hours and hours to make, and they're it's techniques that have been perfected over centuries. Whereas the stuff in Lavender and Sage, it's a little bit faster. It's easy to make, extremely fresh produce, and stuff that you can whip up on a summer night when you don't want to cook. And there's something beautiful in that. Like, it's the healthiest food you can imagine. The stuff that is minimal fuss. I mean, the tian, which is a recipe in the back, is like ratatouille, but you arrange everything in a fancy pattern and everything. And sure, that takes a minute, but it's still simple, and it's just elevating the ingredients that are already there, instead of it's kind of a juxtaposition to taking these extremely humble ingredients like flour, sugar, and water, and egg, and doing crazy stuff to all of a sudden, boom, magic, you've got pastries. To these ingredients where you take these noble ingredients like the world's freshest tomatoes, peppers, and things like that, and turning it into a masterpiece, within a half an hour. And so I like the juxtaposition of that. And I think there's a beauty in all cuisines, really. And so, yeah, it's a fun thing to experiment with. And I'm a bit of a foodie. I don't claim to be as good of a cook as any of my heroines, but I do enjoy spinning around the kitchen. And so it's been fun to play with that. And I've got my next two contemporary books are likely to be very food centric.
Good, good. My wife loves them. As you know, my wife has a YouTube channel, and she's cooks a lot of the recipes, the things that that you have. So she wants to do the tian, and I know she's looking at was it the lemon verbena cookies? Is that what they were? Or orange
Oh,
verbena?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, lemon verbena cookies. Yeah, the lemon verbena cookies. Yeah, yeah. I need to make another batch of those. We're getting into warm weather here, and I have lavender plants that are going to bloom. That's a fun fact, actually. When we moved into our house, because Estes Park, winter lasts a long time. We moved in late March. It was still snow, and so we couldn't really see what the landscaping looked like. I just figured it was the typical low water shrubby stuff. Come summer, We come back from a trip, and all of a sudden, the yard is purple, and it's lavender and Russian sage. And I thought it was all Russian sage. No, it was like a dozen lavender plants. So lavender and sage is a subtle tribute to my own yard.
There you go. Well, if you're cooking, I'll give you my address. You can send any extra cookies or anything you make. Send them to me. We will accept those. So, hey, you have three females. I think you have three important females who cross into Tempesta's life, and I want to sit there and make sure I have the names right. One is Esteva or Esteva. One is Genofa, and then there's Carol. Tell just a little bit about each of them and how they affect Tempesta.
Okay, so Esteva is the best friend she never had. She has led a fairly lonely existence, and because of her family legacy, etc., like people have often liked her because of her family. You know, they pretended to like her because of her connection to a powerful family. And she's always been mistrustful of people because of that. And then when they find out that she's the unfavored child, like those friendships tend to dissolve. And so that's made her very leery of making friendships. And when Esteva comes along and gently says, you know, maybe stop wearing all black, maybe, you know, maybe this is, you know, giving her gentle encouragement to join village life, she learns to love that. And, you know, Esteva becomes her lifeline to the village, especially when her other lifeline to the village, Tiberi, it runs hot and cold a lot. Because he's got a complicated relationship with foreigners coming into town. Because you can imagine like a place like Saint-Colomb, people come in, oh my God, this is so quaint. I'm going to buy a house here and turn it into the world's most amazing Airbnb, and it never pans out. And so they leave the town poorer than when they came. And so he's got a complicated relationship. And then Genofa is the grandmother that should have been. And she really is, you know, she was a mother, like an aunt figure to her own mother. And so there's a deep family connection there. And Genofa takes her under her wing and, you know, kind of insists that the village treat her well. And she learns a lot. She's a teacher figure, and she is just a lovely character. And I can imagine her with a long white gray braid slung over one shoulder, and she walks with a walking stick. But an amazing artist and very spry and very snarky. And yeah, she's a wise old crone, and she's as loving as Lucille should have been. She's the anti Lucille. And then Carol, who is just feisty and fun. She's she is she is Tempesta's editor at the New York Gazette, I think is what I called the paper. And which is a fictional newspaper, obviously. And she recognizes that despite a tremendous amount of talent on Tempesta's part, she's not happy. And you know, there's some realities, like they go into to review a restaurant together, and the food is terrible, but because the you know, the hedge fund or whatever that owns the restaurant is a major sponsor of the paper, they can't pan the restaurant. Tempesta, I mean, that is a sticking point for Tempesta. That's, you know, it's kind of her integrity is on the line, and the food deserved to be panned. It was terrible. And you know, the chefs that are trying to be too inventive for the sake of invention, and she doesn't have a lot of patience for it. And but Carol is a tough love character, and that, yeah, she's very realistic. Like, she understands they can't pan the restaurant, but she also understands why Tempesta isn't comfortable with that. And so she finds a way to keep her in the fold, even from Provence. And she learns a lot from her bestie, because they're very tight. She learns a lot from Tempesta's outlook on life, and I think Carol is a lovely character, and she's kind of a mother hen, like the cool older sister figure. But there's of course a little bit of a professional distance that gets breached. But they were never like, they couldn't be besties in New York when they were, you know, when they were working for each other, when Tempesta was working for her. So, but once she moves away, that professional distance is able to close, even though they're further apart.
Yeah, very good. Now, I read your book, and I'm reminded of another small French town, that Joanne Harris introduced us to in her series called Chocolat. She ended up having 4 books in that series. I hope that we'll see multiple books with Saint-Colomb and Tempesta. Is that something you envision?
I would love to. I have nothing written. My next contemporary book does visit Benac et Cazenac, which is the village that Chocolat was based on. But there is a very it's an unmentioned, but there is a connection to Tempesta. But it's about a woman here in Estes Park. Well, she's in Denver, but her family's in Estes Park. She gets an engagement ring and a DNA kit for Christmas. Neither of those things goes well, and she ends up on this whirlwind. And she's a food matchmaker. She's a high end food broker for restaurants and gourmet grocery stores in Colorado, and she knows all the local food in the region. But her business isn't doing well, and she goes on this crazy trip to Europe to visit all the places where her family comes from, and she's visited by visions of her foremothers. But there are some connections, but that is not to say that I could not continue the Saint-Colomb series for sure.
Yeah, I think there's so much that's there. So many wonderful characters, male and female. I just think there's so much there that it'd be a whole heck of a lot of fun. And, the one thing, though, I got out of this book is a message of hope and happiness. I really did. As I was
Yeah,
reading,
absolutely.
as I read this to my wife, I always read your books to my wife, and she was just so got that glow also that this woman, things are turning out for this woman. We're going to make things work. Again, I don't know if that's the intention, but boy, it certainly comes through that hope and happiness will solve problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that pessimism and dread aren't going to solve a lot of issues. Whereas, and that's what, and I know it comes across perhaps as a bit like outsider coming to save the day. But the people in Saint Colomb have been a bit defeated by watching all their friends and family members move out of town and seeing their bustling town shrink. And I think that hard thing to overcome, and her not coming in with that, generational kind of uh, pessimism is why she's able to kick them in the keister and get them to help revitalize the village. And that with the help of the 2 other younger people in town, Tempesta or Tiberi and Esteva, they're able to help turn things around in a very deliberate way.
Yes, yes. Now, you have hinted about some other books. So I want to ask, what's coming up? What's in the future? What can we look forward to next from Aimie Runyan? Tell us all about it.
3 books coming in the next year. I have 2 solo books and one what's the word? Anthology or a co-written novel with 2 friends. But the next book is coming on September 10th. It's called Mademoiselle Eiffel. It's the untold story of Claire Eiffel, Gustave Eiffel of Eiffel Tower fame. It's his oldest daughter who took over the raising of the family and became his assistant and right-hand woman after the death of her mother when Claire was only 14. And it's a true story, and it's my first foray into biographical fiction. And I even have the cover here. Oop. The cover. This is
There it
this is a
is.
padded mailer, but that's what the cover
Wow.
looks like.
Okay.
And so that's coming to you in September. The next book after that is the co-written novel, The Liberty Scarf, with Janelle Siselski and Rachel McMillan. And it's a story about 3 women coming home from World War One, and they are all connected by a scarf from Liberty of London. And it's a story about the end of the war, and it was a great deal of fun to write with those 2 lovely women. And then my next contemporary is called The Wandering Season, slated to come out on April 1st of 2025. And it's the DNA crazy trek through Europe, foodie trek through Europe story. Yeah.
Well, I am waiting for all these to come up on NetGalley so I can get the books, get started reading them early. And I do hope that friends out there, if you get a chance, you want to read the books of Aimie, because she is a wonderful writer. And as she said, we've touched a little bit, a series up in Canada. We have this. We've got other historical stuff that she's doing. It's out of this world. You're going to really, really love it. And you know what? Aimie, you keep writing. I'm going to keep asking if you'll come back on. I hope you will in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Aimie is just a delight, and she is a really fine writer. I love her storylines. I love her plots, and I think you're going to really like this book, "The Memory of Lavender and Sage." It's a really wonderful book. I know somebody said, "Oh, is it a girl book? Is it a guy book?" You know what? It's a contemporary fiction book that anybody can write, and you're going to really, really enjoy this. What am I looking at? Well, if you remember last week, yeah, some of the appliances are fixed. I want you to know that. Yes, some are fixed. Many are not, but we have an oven that works, just so you know that. And the roof is no longer leaking from the whatever it is, the condenser up in the attic. I don't know, but that stopped. But anyway, that's not all I'm looking at. No, I'm looking at a news story that just knocks me over. Have you read about this? A pineapple, a single pineapple is being sold out in California for $395. That's right. One pineapple, $395. Now, this is one of these new luxury fruits. Oh, I know you have them. I have them. We have luxury fruits everywhere. I don't have a damn thing like that, okay? Who is going to spend $395 for a pineapple? Now, it's called, I got it here, the Ruby Glow pineapple. Oh, it was concocted specially by those people down in Costa Rica, and now it's being sold here for $395. This is what's wrong with the world. Those people don't understand the world I live in. And I understand they got a lot of money, but you don't go throwing it away on a pineapple for $395? Really? There's also this thing. Let me push this over here a minute. Yeah. What's it? It's called the Oishi strawberry. Now, I'm sure you have not heard of it. I hadn't either. Maybe you have. The Oishi strawberry. Six, mind you. 6 strawberries cost more than $10. Now it's strawberry season here. Okay, we're picking strawberries and we're getting pints and quarts. We can buy that cheaper than we can the Oishi strawberry. 6 strawberries for $10? What type of a world are we living in? I don't know. But I'm looking at, and I'll tell you what, I know my son Nathaniel, he was out picking strawberries the other day, and when he was done, it didn't cost that much. He got more than 6 for $10. I gotta tell you that much. Ay, 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 ay. Anyway, hey, listen, I hope you had a good time with this. This is coming out right around the time of Memorial Day, and I hope you had a good day, a good picnic, had time with your friends and family. Well, anyway, on behalf of my website, viewsonbooks.com, on behalf of my good friends at Podcast Studio A, this is Blaine DeSantis for Books and Looks saying, may all your leaves be pages in a book.